All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today we're mapping out the massive pressure cooker that is Eastern Europe and Central Asia. We're looking at a deeply interconnected region that's literally transforming right before our eyes, being reshaped by forces that are both incredibly sudden and painfully slow-moving. So, here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll start with the region under pressure. Look at the war of attrition, isolating the Crimean Peninsula, and the resulting economic and logistics crises. After that, we'll pivot to the Caspian Sea collapse, and finally, what an unrecognizable future map might actually look like. Part 1. A region under pressure. Look, two completely distinct crises are redrawing the map of the Eurasian continent as we speak. While they may seem like isolated events on the surface, both the kinetic warfare in the West and the massive ecological disaster unfolding in the East are destroying infrastructure and uprooting millions of lives. Moving on to Part 2. The war of attrition. The sheer human cost here is staggering. We're talking an estimated 1.2 million casualties. To put that into perspective, that's roughly 3% of Russia's entire pre-war male fighting age population, just gone from the workforce, either killed or wounded. And to sustain those kinds of numbers, the military has had to lean heavily on massive financial incentives, which is, frankly, putting a huge strain on their domestic economy. And on the other side of the line, the toll is just as devastating. While the raw number is lower at an estimated 600,000 casualties, this represents nearly 7% of Ukraine's pre-war fighting age males. That is a much sharper demographic blow. Honestly, it's just the brutal, stark reality of attritional warfare. Now, despite those massive casualties over the past 3.5 years, the territorial changes, they've been grindingly slow. We're talking only an extra 1.5% of land changing hands since November 2022. You can see how the front lines expanded massively in early 2022, right? But since then, they've hardened into this impenetrable wall of drones and fortified defenses. This incredibly dense, static front line is exactly what's forcing military strategists to start looking for vulnerabilities elsewhere. Which brings us to Part 3, isolating the Crimean Peninsula. So, the objective here is really fascinating. It's to flip Crimea's geography from a major military strength into a massive vulnerability, essentially turning the peninsula into an isolated island. You see, Crimea is naturally connected to the mainland by just a few incredibly narrow geographical choke points. By systematically targeting those land corridors, the big bridge, and the ferries with a constant barrage of explosive drones, a massive logistical squeeze is being applied. When you track this timeline, you can see exactly how these repeated strikes have relentlessly pushed logistics away from that bridge. Think about it. What was supposed to be a permanent $4 billion artery is now completely banned for heavy freight trucks. Instead, they're forced onto this much longer, highly exposed land route that drone operators have pretty grimly started calling the Highway of Death. Part 4. Economic and Logistics Crises. Well, when you sever supply lines to 2.5 million people, the domino effect is just vicious. We're talking about a massive 71% crash in military cargo traffic in just 2 weeks. Add to that total bans on civilian fuel sales and a complete shutdown of public transit after 10 p.m. This purely military strategy has triggered a full-blown state of emergency. It's literally halving summer tourist bookings and, crucially, starving the front lines of essential supplies. But while the war is reshaping borders by force, you have to ask, what's quietly redrawing the map further east? Let's pivot from the sudden kinetic shifts in Ukraine and look at a slow-moving but equally devastating geographical transformation happening right now in Central Asia. We are looking at an environmental shift so massive, it will literally change the shape of the Earth as seen from space. That brings us to Part 5, the Caspian Sea collapse. Here's the critical vulnerability you need to understand. While the northern basin makes up a full third of the sea's surface area, it averages just 5 meters deep. That means it holds only 1% of the total water volume. It's basically acting like a giant thin puddle on a massive flat plain. So even a tiny drop in overall sea levels causes miles and miles of this basin to just vanish. Since the mid-1990s, the sea has entered a brutal, constant downward trend, already losing nearly 24,000 square kilometers of surface area. Now, sure, the sea has fluctuated historically, we know that. But this modern freefall, it's incredibly sharp. Satellite data is already confirming that the shores are retreating at an alarming pace, especially in that highly vulnerable northeastern sector we just talked about. The Caspian is basically caught in a devastating geographical trap. The Volga River provides 80% of the sea's freshwater, right? But a 12% drop in its volume from lower precipitation is literally starving the sea. Add a 1 degree Celsius rise in surface temperature, which accelerates evaporation like crazy, and the math just guarantees a continued severe decline.
And our final section, Part 6, an unrecognizable future map. By the end of this century, even under a medium emission scenario, we're looking at a 9-meter drop that will completely erase the northern basin. And under a high emission scenario, an 18-meter drop. An area the size of Portugal will completely dry up. No way around it. That erases the breeding grounds of the endangered Caspian seal and exposes decades of toxic agricultural runoff straight into the air.
These retreating waters are going to literally strand local economies. Imagine building the $10 billion offshore Kashagan oil field in Kazakhstan, only for the ocean to literally run away from it. Major ports like Akhtau and Baku will suddenly find themselves miles inland, requiring either complete abandonment or totally impossible dredging operations just to survive. So, let's tie this whole shebang together. The drying Caspian directly threatens this exact critical trade route, the Middle Corridor, forcing logistics back into the very geopolitical hotspots currently engulfed in war. The whole point of the Middle Corridor was to bypass the conflict zones we discussed earlier. But if the Caspian becomes too shallow for cargo ships to navigate between Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan, well, global supply chains might be forced right back into the very territories that are currently enduring historic levels of attrition and blockades. It is a really stark reality that, regardless of human intervention at this point, dramatic geographic and economic dislocation for 15 million coastal residents is already locked in. The data shows that even if global emissions are curbed tomorrow, the sheer inertia of this ecological collapse means millions of people will likely be forced to relocate as climate refugees. It's an eerie echo of the tragic death of the nearby Aral Sea. So, I want to leave you with this final thought. With military conflicts violently draining the region's demographics and a shift in climate quietly erasing its largest inland sea, how will the surviving populations adapt to an entirely unrecognizable map over the next decade? As these immense pressures continue to mount, what is the breaking point actually going to look like for this deeply interconnected region? We're watching the permanent alteration of both human borders and natural geography in real time. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. Keep analyzing the data, and definitely keep questioning the map as it shifts beneath our feet.